the alien children hung stockings on. Christmas, never knowing a human janitor would fill them. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The Orion station floated silently at the edge of the Andromeda Gate, a massive wheel of steel and glass that served as the largest diplomatic hub in the known galaxy. Within its sterile corridors and perfectly temperature-controlled chambers, over 300 alien species lived and worked in careful harmony. And in the maintenance tunnels beneath the grand assembly halls, a human janitor named Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart through another endless night shift. Ethan had been working on Orion Station for nearly 2 years now. It wasn't the job he dreamed of when he left Earth, but it paid well enough and kept him far from the complications he'd left behind. At 42 years old, with graying temples and calloused hands, he'd long since accepted that some people were meant for greatness while others were meant to mop floors. He was okay with that. Mostly, the station operated on a universal standard time, but most species kept their own cultural calendars. The Valkyrians celebrated the Feast of Seven Moons. The century marked the day of emergence. Insectoid Hive Collective observed the harmonizing, a week-long period of synchronized meditation. Ethan respected them all, cleaned up after their festivals, and never complained about the extra work. But December was different. December made him ache in ways he couldn't quite explain to his alien coworkers. It had been 4 years since he'd spent Christmas on Earth, 4 years since he'd seen snow or smelled pine or heard carols in the shopping district, 4 years since everything had fallen apart. He tried not to think about it. The night shift on Orion Station was quiet. Most of the diplomats and their families were in their quarters, the grand halls empty except for the soft hum of environmental systems and the occasional patrol of security drones. Ethan liked it this way. No one to bother him, no one to pity the human janitor who'd ended up so far from home. He was emptying a waste receptacle near the education wing when he heard them, young voices, high-pitched and excited, speaking in a mixture of languages. Ethan paused, curious. The education wing was supposed to be empty at this hour. He followed the sound to one of the large common rooms used for interspecies youth programs. The door was slightly ajar, and through it Ethan could see something that made his breath catch in his throat. There were about 20 of them, children from a dozen different species. A young Valkyrian with silver scales and large curious eyes, 2 century siblings, their bioluminescent markings glowing softly in the dim light. A small Frenati, barely 3 ft tall, with 4 arms and a face like a wise old turtle. Several others, each unique, each precious in their own way, and they were hanging stockings, not real stockings. Of course they'd improvised. Some had used thermal regulation sleeves from environmental suits. Others had cut up old maintenance cloths. One industrious hive youth had woven something from synthesized fiber that looked almost authentic. They were hanging them along the wall using magnetic clips and adhesive strips, creating a crooked, colorful line of makeshift stockings. At the front of the room stood a young human girl, no more than 12 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Ethan recognized her vaguely as the daughter of Ambassador Wells, one of the few human diplomats on the Station, she was explaining something too. The others with animated gestures. Ethan stepped closer, careful to stay in the shadows. The girl, whose name was Emily, was telling them about Christmas. Her voice carried that peculiar mixture of authority and uncertainty that came with youth explaining something important. So you hang the stockings, she said. And then Santa Claus comes in the night and fills them with presents, small things, usually candy and toys and little surprises. It's one of the best parts of Christmas. A young Valkyrian raised a clawed hand. But Emily, who is this Santa Claus? Is he a human deity? Emily laughed. No, he's not real. It's just a story parents tell their kids. Someone to make Christmas feel magical. Then who fills the stockings? Asked one of the century children. Your parents do, Emily explained. They pretend to be Santa, the Threnody child whose name was Pip, tilted his ancient-looking head. But we are not human. Our parents do not know this tradition. They will not fill our stockings. A silence fell over the group. Emily's expression faltered. I mean, we could fill each other's stockings. We could get small things and trade them, but we have no currency for the station shops, Pip said quietly, and we are not permitted to leave the education wing without supervision. Another silence, heavier. This time, Ethan could see the hope draining from their young faces. They had tried to create something special, something human, something magical, and reality was crushing it before their eyes. It's okay, Emily said, her voice a little too bright. We can still hang them. They'll look pretty, and maybe next year we can figure something out. The children nodded, but the excitement had gone out of the room. They finished hanging their stockings in near silence, then filed out in small groups, heading back to their family quarters in different sections of the station. Emily was the last to leave. She stood for a moment looking at the line of empty stockings, and Ethan saw her wipe her eyes before she turned off the lights and left. Ethan stood alone in the darkness, staring at those stockings. He thought about his own childhood, about waking up on Christmas morning to find his stocking bulging with treats. He thought about the year his father had lost his job and there wasn't much money, but somehow that stocking had still been full. Oranges and nuts and a chocolate bar, small things that mattered. He thought about his daughter. She would be 16 now. Did she still hang a stocking? Did she even think about him anymore? Ethan turned away and went back to his cart. He had work to do, floors to clean. This wasn't his problem. These weren't his kids. But as he mopped the corridors of the diplomatic wing, as he sanitized the bathrooms in the Valkyrian section, as he scrubbed scuff marks from the floors of the main assembly hall, he couldn't stop thinking about those stockings, about the hope in those young voices, about the disappointment. It was 3:00 in the morning station time when Ethan made his decision. He finished his shift, clocked out, and instead of heading to his tiny quarters in the maintenance section, he went to the station's commercial district. Most of the shops were closed, but a few 24-hour stores served the various species with a regular schedules. Ethan had been saving his wages carefully, sending most of it back to Earth. He had a modest amount in his account, enough for emergencies. This was an emergency. He started at a center shop that sold bioluminescent crystals. The shopkeeper, an elderly century with deep blue markings, looked up in surprise at the human janitor entering at such an odd hour. I need something. Small, Ethan said, something pretty for a child. The shopkeeper's markings flickered with curiosity. What kind of child? Century children, Ethan said. Two of them. The shopkeeper's expression softened. He reached under his counter and pulled out two small crystals, each no larger than a marble, that pulsed with gentle rainbow light. These are memory stones, he said. Young Century used them to record their first thoughts. They are traditional gifts. How much? Ethan asked. The shopkeeper named a price that made Ethan WSC, but he paid it without arguing. As he turned to leave, the shopkeeper called out to him, Human, why do you buy gifts at this hour? Ethan paused. Because someone has to, he said simply. Next was a Valkyrian specialty store where he found nutritional supplements flavored like their home world's native fruits. Clerk, a young Valkyrian who was restocking shelves, recommended the sapphire berry flavor. It is most popular with our young, she said. Then she added, as if reading something in his face, is this for the children in the education wing? Ethan looked at her sharply. You know about that? My younger brother is one of them, she said softly. He came home tonight very sad. He told me about the Christmas stockings. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm going to fix it. Clerk's eyes widened. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a small carved figurine of a Valkyrian ship. This was mine when I was young. Please give it to one of them. No charge. Ethan accepted it carefully. Thank you. He moved through the commercial district like a man on a mission. At a Threnodai import shop, he found small puzzle boxes that were traditional coming-of-age gifts. At a human store that was nearly empty, he bought chocolate bars and candy canes and a small bag of those cheap plastic toys that came in bulk. At a general goods store, he found colorful socks, small notebooks, and pens that wrote in universal script. With each purchase, his account balance dropped. He was spending everything he had, the money he'd saved to maybe someday go back to Earth and try to fix things with his daughter, the money that represented 2 years of night shifts and lonely meals and careful budgeting. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about Emily's face as she'd wiped her eyes in that darkened room. He thought about Pip's quiet disappointment. He thought about children who tried to celebrate something that wasn't even their tradition just because it seemed magical and wonderful. By the time the shop started closing, Ethan's cleaning cart was full of small gifts. He'd spent almost everything he had, and he still needed more. He returned to his quarters and started going through his own possessions. A small multi-tool he'd carried from Earth, barely used but solid and reliable. A book of human folktales he'd been planning to read someday. A set of colored pencils, flashlight with adjustable spectrum settings that would fascinate any young being. One by one, he added his own belongings to the collection. At 5:00 in the morning, 2 hours before the children would start arriving at the education wing, Ethan returned to that common room. The stockings still hung in their crooked line, empty and waiting. In the quiet darkness, with only the hum of the station systems for company, he began to fill them. For the Varian child, he added the sapphire berry supplements and the carved ship. For the Century siblings, the memory stones and some chocolate. For Pip, the THRNIDI, one of the puzzle boxes, and the multi-tool. For Emily, the book of folktales and a chocolate bar and a note That said simply, "Thank you for sharing." Christmas, he went down the line, carefully considering each stocking. Each child, he tried to remember which beings had expressed interest in which topics during their excited planning session. He distributed his treasures, thoughtfully adding small candies and toys to fill out each stocking, making sure no one was left out. When he was done, the stockings bulged with gifts. They weren't much, these small treasures, nothing expensive or grand, but they were carefully chosen. They were given with thought and love. They were what Christmas was supposed to be. Ethan stood back and looked at his work. His cart was empty, his account was nearly drained, his quarters were a little more bare, but those stockings were full. He left before anyone could arrive, slipping back into the maintenance tunnels like a ghost. He went to his quarters, collapsed on his bunk, and slept the dreamless sleep of the exhausted. He woke 8 hours later to find his personal communicator flooded with messages, confused and still groggy. He opened the first one. It was from Ambassador Wells. "Mr. Cole, I understand you were responsible for the gifts my daughter and her friends found. This morning, I want to speak with you. At your earliest convenience, please contact my office." Ethan's heart sank. He'd broken protocol. He'd interacted with diplomatic families without authorization. He'd probably crossed a dozen security regulations. He was going to be fired or worse, but before he could spiral into panic, he noticed another message. This one was from the Vulcarian clerk who'd given him the carved ship. "The whole station is talking about what you did, human. My brother says it was the most wonderful morning of his life. Thank you." Then another from someone he didn't know, and another and another. Dozens of messages from parents, from station workers, from people he'd never met, all thanking him, all expressing wonder and gratitude. The last message was a video file sent by Ambassador Wells. Ethan opened it with trembling hands. The video showed the common room that morning. The children were arriving one by one and discovering the filled stockings. The sounds of their joy were almost overwhelming. Emily was crying and laughing at the same time, clutching her book. Pip was examining his puzzle box with all four hands, his ancient face split in a delighted grin. The Century siblings were holding their memory stones up to the light, watching the rainbows dance. The Valkyrian child was already eating a sapphire berry supplement, his tail wagging with excitement. But it was what happened next that made Ethan's eyes sting. The children had started showing each other their gifts, sharing their excitement, passing items around to examine and admire. They were acting out the very spirit of Christmas without even knowing it. The joy wasn't in having, it was in the wonder of receiving. The magic wasn't in the gifts themselves, but in the knowledge that someone had cared enough to give them. Emily had found his note. She was reading it aloud to the others. Then she'd said something that the video's audio picked up clearly. "I think Santa Claus is real after all. Maybe not the way the stories say, but someone magical was here last night, someone who cared about us." The video ended. Ethan sat on his bunk, tears running down his face. Not sure if he was sad or happy or both. His communicator chimed. It was a direct call from Ambassador Wells. Ethan accepted it, preparing for the worst. Ambassador Wells appeared on the screen. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I need You to tell me how you knew. Knew what? Ma'am, Ethan asked, how you knew what? Each of them needed. My daughter told me. You gave the Valkyrian child his favorite flavor. You gave the century siblings a traditional gift that even I didn't know about. You gave young Pip a puzzle box and his parents told me there. People give those at a very specific maturity milestone that he'd been worried he wouldn't receive this far from home. Ambassador Wells leaned closer to the camera. You gave each of them exactly what they needed, not just gifts but the right gifts. How? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I listened, he finally said, when I heard them talking, planning their Christmas. I listened to what they said, what they hoped for, what they missed from home. And I tried to give them a little piece of that. Ambassador Wells smiled, and Ethan realized she was crying too. Mr. Cole, do you know what you've done? You've created an interspecies celebration. The parents are all talking. They want to understand this Christmas tradition. They want to know how a human janitor understood their children better than they did. Ethan shook his head. I'm not anyone special. Ma'am, I just cleaned up some stockings. You're wrong, Ambassador Wells said firmly. You're exactly what this station needs, what this whole diplomatic project needs. Someone who sees past the species and the protocols and just sees beings who matter, children who need magic in their lives. She paused, then added, I've spoken with the station administrator. We'd like to offer you a new position, cultural liaison for interspecies youth programs. It comes with a significant pay increase and much better quarters. Someone needs to help these children understand each other's traditions and holidays. Someone who listens. Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared at the screen. Also, Ambassador Wells continued, and her smile turned mischievous. My daughter insists that you're Santa Claus and refuses to hear otherwise. I think you're going to have to take responsibility for that. That broke through Ethan's shock. He laughed. A real laugh, the first in years. I'm not Santa Claus, ma'am. I'm just a janitor who had a little extra time and a credit account. Ambassador Wells shook her head. You're wrong again, Mr. Cole. Santa Claus is whoever decides to be him, whoever sees a need and fills it, whoever makes magic happen for children who have stopped believing in it. By that definition, you're the realest Santa Claus I've ever met. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his quarters for a long time trying to process what had happened. He'd gone from mopping floors to being a cultural liaison. He'd gone from invisible to seen, all because he'd filled some stockings. No, he corrected himself. All because some children had tried to celebrate Christmas even though it wasn't their tradition. All because Emily had shared something she loved. All because he'd listened. Over the following weeks, Ethan settled into his new role. It was strange at first, working in the education wing instead of cleaning it, wearing a clean uniform instead of maintenance coveralls, being greeted by name instead of being invisible. He had an actual office now, a small space with a window overlooking the station's main concourse. He could watch the steady flow of beings from hundreds of worlds, all going about their business, and think about how just weeks ago he'd been invisible among them. The children adopted him immediately. Emily appointed herself as his assistant, teaching him the nuances of interspecies diplomacy with the blunt honesty of youth. She explained which species preferred direct eye contact and which found it aggressive. She showed him how the Threnodai communicated, respect through hand gestures, and how the Valkyrians expressed affection by sharing food. She was 12 years old and already more culturally aware than most of the adult diplomats Ethan met. Pip became his shadow, always asking questions about human traditions. Young Tcharanada had an insatiable curiosity about Earth. What did rain feel like? Were there really animals that lived in the oceans? Did humans really eat plants and animals both? Each answer led to 3 more questions, and Ethan found himself remembering details about his home world he'd long since taken for granted. Through Pip's wonder, he saw Earth fresh again. The Valkyrian child, whose name was SciFi, brought him sapphire berry supplements to try, insisting they were delicious. To Ethan's surprise, they actually were sweet with a slight tang, unlike anything he'd tasted before. SciFi explained that on Valkyra the berries only grew in the coldest mountain regions, and gathering them was a rite of passage for young Valkyrians. The fact that they could be synthesized on the station was both convenient and a little sad. Sethis admitted it meant he could have them anytime, but they'd never taste quite like the ones from home. That conversation stuck with Ethan. It made him realize that all these children were living between worlds. They had the privileges of station life, the safety and comfort and diversity, but they were also disconnected from their home worlds, from the smells and tastes and traditions that made a place feel like home. That's what Christmas had given them, he realized. Not just gifts, but a sense of belonging, a tradition that was theirs, shared among them, creating a new kind of home. The other children in the program each brought their own perspectives. There was LRA, a young century girl who had been born on the station and had never seen her people's home world. She glowed brighter when she was excited, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with emotion. There were the twins Kess and Mara from a species called the Danny, who communicated primarily through harmonized tones and had to learn verbal speech as a second language. There was Beaks, a hulking, graver youth who looked intimidating but was actually the gentlest soul Ethan had ever met, constantly worried about accidentally hurting the smaller children. Each of them had their own struggles, their own moments of homesickness or confusion or loneliness. And each of them, Ethan discovered, had been touched by that Christmas morning in ways he hadn't fully understood at first. It wasn't just about the gifts. It was about being seen, being known, being cared for by someone who had no obligation to care. Ethan started keeping a journal, writing down the things he learned from the children. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted to remember. He wanted to capture these moments of connection, these small revelations about what it meant to care across species and cultures. Sometimes late at night in his new quarters, he'd read back through his entries and marvel at how much his life had changed. But it was the parents who surprised Ethan the most. They sought him out, these diplomats and scientists and cultural experts. They asked him about Christmas, yes, but they asked about other things too. How did humans celebrate birthdays? What were human coming-of-age rituals? How did human parents comfort their children when they were sad? At first, Ethan thought they were testing him, trying to figure out if the janitor really deserved his new position. He'd brace himself for skepticism, for questions designed to expose his lack of formal education or training, but slowly he realized they were genuinely curious. More than that, they were grateful. Their children were happy in a way they hadn't been before. The education wing had transformed from a place of polite interspecies tolerance to a place of genuine friendship. Century scientist named Verr approached him one day in the station's observation lounge. Verr's markings pulsed with what Ethan had learned to recognize as uncertainty. Mr. Cole, the scientist, began. I must ask you something. My daughter LRA, she speaks of you often. She says you understand her better than I do. How is this possible? I am her parent. I have studied human psychology and interspecies communication. Yet you, with no formal training, have reached her in ways I cannot. Ethan had been caught off guard by the question, the vulnerability in it. He'd chosen words carefully. I listened to what she says, and more importantly, what she doesn't say. When she talks about the station, I hear her longing for a home, world she's never seen. When she shows me her schoolwork, I see her trying to prove she's a Centaur's children who were born on the home world. I don't have expertise, Verr. I just pay attention. Verr had been quiet for a long moment, his markings shifting through colors Ethan couldn't read. Then he'd said softly, among my people we value knowledge above all else. We study and analyze and categorize, but perhaps we have forgotten the value of simply seeing. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you for seeing my daughter. That conversation had been repeated in various forms with other parents. Threnody, elder, who realized his grandson felt pressure to act older than his years. A Valkyrian mother who hadn't noticed her son's anxiety about an upcoming molting season. A Danny father who'd been so focused on his diplomatic work that he'd missed his children's growing isolation. Ethan became a bridge between the parents and their children, not because he had answers, but because he asked questions. He helped them see what had been invisible, and in doing so he built relationships across the station that went far beyond his official duties. He was invited to family meals, to cultural ceremonies, to quiet moments when parents needed advice or just someone to talk to. The Valkyrian clerk from the shop, the one who'd given him the carved ship, became a regular visitor to his office. Her name was Thessa, and she'd appointed herself as his unofficial guide to station politics. You need to understand, Mr. Cole, she'd say, her tail swishing with emphasis, that what you did was revolutionary, not the gifts themselves, but the fact that you saw children from different species as equally deserving of care. Many adults on this station maintain careful boundaries. They are cordial but not connected. You erase those boundaries. Ethan protested that he'd only filled some stockings. Thessa had laughed. Sound like wind chimes. Yes, and a seed is only a small thing planted in soil, yet it grows into forests. You planted something here, whether you meant to or not. Emily explained it to him one day as they were decorating for the Valkyrian Feast of Seven Moons. You showed us that traditions are meant to be shared, she said, carefully hanging silver streamers that represented moonlight before everyone kept their celebrations separate, like they were afraid of mixing them up or doing it wrong. But you didn't know enough to be afraid. You just helped us do Christmas because we wanted to. Ethan considered this, helping her reach the higher spots, so now everyone shares everything. Emily grinned, her face Flushed with excitement, last week we all celebrated the Thin Ice Shell Day. We made paper shells and wrote our wishes on them. Pip taught us the traditional songs, and even though we couldn't sing them right, he said our effort honored his ancestors. Next month, we're doing the Century Luminescence Festival. Everyone's going to paint themselves with glow paint. It's going to be amazing. The preparation for the Luminescence Festival became a station-wide event. LRA worked with her parents to obtain safe temporary bioluminescent paint that would work on different skin types. The children practiced the traditional dances, creating a hybrid version that accommodated different numbers of limbs and varying physical abilities. Beaks, the large graver youth, was worried he'd be too clumsy, but the other children insisted he was perfect for representing the Great Bear constellation in their performance. Ethan watched them rehearse, marveling at how they'd taken a Centaur tradition and made it their own without losing its essence. They were creating something new, not human. Traditions imposed on others, not alien. Customs performed by rote, but a genuine fusion of cultures built on mutual respect and affection. What about Christmas? Ethan asked Emily during one of their planning sessions. Will you celebrate it again? Emily's expression turned serious. Everyone wants to. The parents are already asking about it. They want to understand why their children loved it so much. She paused, then added quietly, will you be Santa Claus again? Ethan felt his throat tighten. Emily, I'm not really Santa Claus, you know that, right? I'm just a guy who filled some stockings. Emily shook her head firmly, her ponytail swinging. You're wrong. Santa Claus isn't about being magical or flying around with reindeer. It's about caring when you don't have to. It's about seeing what people need and giving it to them, even if it cost you something. She looked up at him with eyes far older than her 12 years, especially if it cost you something. That observation haunted Ethan for days. He'd never thought of it that way before. He'd always seen Santa Claus as a figure of abundance, of infinite resources and magical capability, but Emily had reframed it. Santa Claus was about sacrifice, about choosing to give even when giving hurt, about making magic real through personal cost. The insight changed how he approached his work. He started looking for the invisible needs, the unspoken struggles he noticed when Cass and Morris seemed withdrawn and discovered they were being teased by older children for their unusual speech patterns. He intervened gently, organizing a music program where their tonal communication became an asset rather than a difference. He saw when SciFiStories was anxious about an upcoming visit from Valkyrian officials and worked with the child's parents to ease the pressure. Small things, invisible things, the kind of things a janitor might notice but never have the authority to address. Now he could act, now he could help, and with each small intervention he understood a little better what Emily had meant. Caring when it cost you something, especially when it cost you something. That night Ethan sent a message to Earth. It was the first time he'd contacted his daughter in 4 years. He didn't apologize for leaving or try to explain the complicated reasons why he'd gone. He just told her about the stockings, about the children, about learning to see magic again in unexpected places. He didn't know if she'd respond. He didn't know if it was too late to fix what he'd broken, but he sent it anyway because Emily was right. Santa Claus wasn't about being perfect or magical. It was about trying even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. 3 days later, his daughter responded. The message was short. Dad, I'm glad you found something worth staying for. Maybe someday you could tell me about it in person. I'd like that. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door left open. It was hope. Christmas came to Orion Station like nothing anyone had ever seen. Ethan worked with the children and their parents to create a celebration that honored the original tradition while welcoming all species. They hung stockings, hundreds of them, in the main assembly hall. They decorated with lights and colors from a dozen different worlds. They sang songs in multiple languages, creating harmonies that had never existed before. And on Christmas Eve, something remarkable happened. The adults of Orion Station, these diplomats and scientists who spent their days negotiating treaties and debating universal laws, became Santa Claus. Every single one of them. They filled stockings for children who weren't their own. They learned about other species, traditions, and incorporated them into gifts. They stayed up late working together, creating magic. Ethan watched them from the observation deck, seeing the main assembly hall transformed into something beautiful and impossible. Ambassador Wells found him there. Quite a change from last year, she said. Ethan nodded. I never meant for it to get this big. Ambassador Wells smiled. The best things never start out big. They start with one person deciding to care. Everything else just grows from there. She handed him a small package. This came for you. It was delivered to my office by mistake. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a picture frame. The photo showed him and his daughter, taken 10 years ago at Christmas. She was 6 years old, grinning with missing front teeth, holding up a stocking. He had his arm around her and they were both laughing. He'd forgotten this photo existed. He'd forgotten they'd ever been that happy. On the back, his daughter had written a note. Dad, I found this in Mom's attic. I thought you might want it. I remember that Christmas. You were the best Santa Claus ever. Maybe you still are. Come home sometime and tell me about the aliens. I want to hear everything. Ethan couldn't speak. He just held the frame and let the tears come. Ambassador Wells put a hand on his shoulder. You know what the really remarkable thing is, she said softly. You changed this station because you showed us what it means to be human, not the technology or the diplomacy or the grand gestures. Just the simple act of caring about children who needed someone to care. That's humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Mr. Cole, the ability to see a stranger's child and think, I can help. With that, down in the assembly hall, the celebration was beginning. Children of a dozen species were gathering around the decorated stockings, excited and hopeful. Parents were smiling. Cameras were recording, and somewhere in the diplomatic archives, someone was probably documenting this as a significant moment in intersaz relations. But to Ethan it was simpler than that. It was just Christmas the way it was meant to be. Magic made real by people deciding to care. He and Ambassador Wells went down to join the celebration. As they entered the hall, Emily spotted him and waved frantically. Mr. Cole, Santa Claus, you have to see. Everyone did it. Everyone helped. Ethan walked through the crowd accepting thanks and congratulations, feeling overwhelmed and humbled in grateful awe. At once, he found Pip standing by, stocking that bulged with gifts, Mr. Cole, Pip said solemnly. I have learned something important. Christmas is not just a human tradition, it is a heart tradition. Any being with a heart can celebrate it. Ethan knelt down so he was eye level with the small Frenati. That's exactly right, Pip, and you know what the best part is? What? Pip asked. Now you can take it home. When you return to your world, you can share Christmas with other Threnodi. It can become part of your traditions, too. Pip's ancient face lit up. I will do this, and I will tell them about the human Santa Claus who taught us about caring. Ethan shook his head gently. I'm not Santa Claus, Pip. We all are. Anyone who decides to be. The celebration lasted well into the night. Children opened their stockings and shared their gifts. Adults exchanged their own presents, having learned the joy of surprising each other. Someone started singing a Christmas carol, and soon others joined in, adding harmonies and alien vocal ranges that transformed the familiar song into something new and beautiful. Ethan stood at the edge of it, all watching. He thought about how he'd ended up here on this station so far from Earth. He'd been running from his failures, from his broken family, from his disappointments. He'd thought he was just a janitor, just someone who cleaned up after others, but Emily had been right. Santa Claus wasn't about being perfect or magical. It was about seeing a need and filling it. It was about caring when you didn't have to. It was about making magic real. And maybe Ethan thought that was what being human really meant. Not the technology or the achievements or the grand gestures, just the simple, stubborn insistence on caring, on seeing strangers and thinking I can help, on finding children who needed magic and deciding to give it to them. He looked down at the picture frame in his hands, at his daughter's grinning 6-year-old face, at his own younger self. Before everything got complicated, he thought about her message, come home sometime and tell me about the aliens. Maybe he would. Maybe this time he'd have something worth coming home for. Maybe this time he'd learned enough about caring to do it right. But for now he was here on Orion Station, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, watching children celebrate a tradition they'd adopted as their own, creating magic. The darkness of space. Ambassador Wells appeared beside him again. Merry Christmas, Mr. Cole, she said softly. Ethan smiled. Merry Christmas, Ambassador, and thank you for giving me a chance to be more than a janitor. Ambassador Wells shook her head. You were always more than a janitor, Ethan. We just needed to see it, and more importantly, you needed to see it. She gestured to the celebration around them. This is going to change things, you know, not just on this station. The word is spreading. Other diplomatic posts are asking about it. They want to know how we created such harmony among the children. They want to know about this Christmas tradition that transcends species. Ethan felt a flutter of something in his chest, something that might have been hope. So what happens now? Ambassador Wells said, we keep doing what we're doing. We keep listening to the children. We keep sharing traditions. We keep caring. She smiled. And next year we make Christmas even bigger. The celebration continued for hours. Eventually children started getting tired, their excitement burning out into sleepy satisfaction. Parents gathered them up, carrying stockings full of treasures, heading back to their quarters across the station. The adults who'd stayed up filling those stockings Exchanged tired smiles, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing something worthwhile. As the halls slowly emptied, Ethan stayed to help clean up. Old habits died hard, and besides, he found the work meditative. He was picking up discarded wrapping paper when Emily approached him, barely able to keep her eyes open. "Mr. Cole," she said, stifling a yawn. This was the best Christmas ever, even better than on Earth. Ethan felt his eyes sting. That's high praise, Emily. What made it so special? Emily thought about it seriously. Despite her exhaustion, on Earth, Christmas was just for humans. Here it was for everyone. That makes it bigger, better. She paused, then added, "And you were here, you made it happen." "We all made it happen," Ethan corrected gently. "That's the whole point," Emily smiled. "That's what I mean. On Earth, people forget that sometimes. They forget that Christmas is about everyone helping, but you remembered, you showed us." Ambassador Wells collected her daughter, giving Ethan a grateful nod. Emily fell asleep before they even left the hall, her head on her mother's shoulder, still clutching her book of folk tales. Ethan finished cleaning as the station's artificial night cycle deepened. He returned the last of the decorations to storage, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the darkness, remembering how it had looked just hours before, full of light and laughter and life. He thought about the path that had led him here, the mistakes and the pain and the running away, the night shifts and the loneliness and the slow acceptance that he'd probably never be more than he was. The moment he'd heard children's voices and decided to listen, the choice to care when he didn't have to. It was strange how one decision could change everything, how filling some stockings could lead to a new job, new friends, new purpose, how caring about strangers' children could remind him why his own daughter mattered, how being Santa Claus for aliens could teach him how to be a father again. Ethan pulled out his communicator and recorded a message to his daughter. He told her about the celebration, about the children, about the parents who'd stayed up all night creating magic. He told her about Pip and Emily and SciFiStories. He told her about learning to care again. And then, his voice rough with emotion, he said, "I want to come home, sweetheart, not forever, because I think I'm needed here, but for a visit for Christmas next year. If you'll have me, I want to tell you everything. I want to try again." He sent the message before he could second guess himself. Then he went to his new quarters, larger and more comfortable than his old maintenance room, and slept deeply. The response came 2 days later. His daughter's face appeared on the screen, 16 years old now, with his eyes in her mother's smile. "Dad," she said, and he could hear the emotion in her voice. "Yes. Come home for Christmas. I want to hear about the aliens. I want to hear everything." And Dad, she paused, tears in her eyes, "I'm proud of you, what you did filling those stockings for kids who weren't even human. I don't know if I would have thought to do that, but it's exactly the kind of thing you used to do when I was little, before everything got hard. I'm glad you found that part of yourself again." Ethan played the message 3 times, each time finding something new to marvel at. His daughter nearly grown, his daughter proud of him, his daughter willing to give him another chance. The weeks after Christmas were busy. Ethan worked with the education wing staff to develop programs for sharing cultural traditions. He helped parents understand their children's new Into Ressi's friendships, he mediated minor conflicts and celebrated small victories and learned more about the galaxy than he'd ever imagined possible. But the real work was simpler than any of that. It was listening when a Varian child was homesick. It was helping a Centaur youth navigate the complicated social dynamics of adolescence. It was being present, being consistent, being someone who cared. It was being human. One evening, about a month after Christmas, Ethan was in his office, reviewing proposals for the next holiday calendar when Ambassador Wells knocked on his door. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Always," Ethan replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Ambassador Wells sat down, her expression serious. "I wanted you to hear this from me first. The Galactic Council has taken an interest in what we've done. Here, they're proposing a new initiative, cross-cultural youth exchange programs based on our model. They want you to help develop the curriculum." Ethan blinked. "Me, I'm not an educator. I was a janitor a month ago." Ambassador Wells smiled. "You're someone who understands what we're trying to accomplish here. Building bridges between species doesn't start with treaties and trade agreements. It starts with children learning to see each other as friends. You've proven that." She pulled out a data pad. "This is the proposal. They're offering you a position as Director of Interspecies Youth Relations. You'd work with stations and colonies across the galaxy, helping them develop programs like ours. You train others to do what you do." Ethan felt overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm qualified for that." Ambassador Wells leaned forward. "Ethan, you made 20 children from 12 different species feel cared for on a holiday that wasn't even theirs. You turned a human tradition into a galactic celebration. You reminded all of us what it means to put others first. If that doesn't qualify you, I don't know what does." Ethan looked at the proposal. It was everything he'd never thought he wanted. A career recognition, a chance to make a real difference, but it would also mean more travel, more time away from Earth, less chance of rebuilding what he'd broken with his daughter. As if reading his mind, Ambassador Wells added, "The position is based here on Orion Station. You travel occasionally, but this would be your home base. And Ethan, the Galactic Council has agreed to provide transportation vouchers for family visits. You could go back to Earth regularly. You could have both." Ethan looked up at her, surprised. "You arranged that?" Ambassador Wells didn't deny it. "Emily told me about your daughter, about how you're trying to reconnect. I lost my husband 3 years ago, and Emily's all I have left. I understand how precious those relationships are. You shouldn't have to choose between doing good work and being a good father." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Thank you," he managed. "So," Ambassador Wells asked, "what do you say? Will you help us teach the galaxy how to care?" Ethan thought about those stockings hanging empty in the common room. He thought about the choice he'd made to spend everything he had to fill them. He thought about how that choice had changed everything. "Yes," he said simply, "I'll do it." The news spread quickly through the station. Ethan found himself congratulated at every turn, praised by beings he'd never met. It was embarrassing and humbling and strange. He was still just a man who'd filled some stockings. He didn't understand why everyone made it such a big deal, but the children understood. They threw him a party in the education wing, decorating it with symbols from all They're different cultures. They gave him gifts, small handmade things that meant more than any official recognition could. Pip presented him with a puzzle box the young Threnody had solved and reassembled himself. It's tradition, Pip explained solemnly, to pass a solved puzzle to mentor. You are my mentor, Mr. Cole. Emily gave him a drawing she'd made showing all of them together on Christmas, the stockings in the background. At the bottom she'd written, "To Santa Claus, who taught us that magic is real when we make it together, SciFi." The Valkyrian child gave him a scale from his molting, mounted in a small frame. My parent says this is how Valkyrians honor those who change their lives, Seth said shyly. You changed mine, Mr. Cole. You made me feel like I belong here. Ethan accepted each gift with tears in his eyes. He tried to explain that he was just one person, that they'd all made Christmas special together, but the children shook their heads, certain in the way only children could be. You started it, they insisted. You cared first. That night alone in his quarters, Ethan looked at the gifts surrounding him, the puzzle box, the drawing, the frame scale, the picture of his daughter, the data pad with his new job offer. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the broken man who'd fled Earth to the person these children called Santa Claus. He recorded another message to his daughter. I've been offered a new job, he said. It's bigger than I ever thought I'd have, but I'm going to accept it on one condition: that I can come home regularly, that I can be part of your life again, if you'll let me. Because I've learned something out here among the stars, sweetheart. It doesn't matter how important your work is if you forget about the people who matter most. He paused, then added, I filled some stockings for alien children, and they call me Santa Claus, but you know what I realized? I need to be Santa Claus for you too, not by bringing gifts, but by showing up, by being present, by caring enough to try, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I don't know if I can fix what I broke when I left, but I want to try. Will you let me try? The response came faster than he expected. His daughter's face appeared on the screen, and she was smiling through tears. Dad, she said, yes, 1,000 times yes. Come home, tell me about the aliens and the stockings and everything, and then stay for a while. We have a lot of Christmases to make up for. 6 months later, Ethan Cole stood in his childhood home on Earth, helping his daughter hang stockings over the fireplace. She was telling him about her school, her friends, her hopes for college. He was listening, really listening, the way he'd learned to listen on Orion Station, the way that had changed everything. Outside, snow was falling, blanketing the world in white. It was Christmas Eve, and tomorrow morning he and his daughter would open presents together. It wouldn't fix everything. There were still years of distance to bridge, wounds that needed healing, but it was a start. His daughter hung the last stocking and stepped back. Do you think they're doing it on the station too? She asked. Having Christmas? Ethan nodded. Ambassador Wells sent me pictures. They're bigger than ever. 50 different species participating this year. Children teaching their parents, parents teaching each other, all because some kids decided to hang stockings and someone decided to fill them. His daughter smiled. That's amazing, Dad. You started something really special. Ethan shook his head. I didn't start it. I just helped. Christmas was always about caring, about seeing someone who needs magic and deciding to give it to them. I just remembered that at the right moment. His daughter was quiet for a moment. Dad, she said slowly, do you think we could do something like that here, not just for us but for others? There are kids in my school who don't have much, who could use a little Christmas magic. Ethan felt his heart swell. What did you have in mind? She explained her idea, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. They could organize a stocking drive, get the whole community involved, collect gifts for children who needed them, make Christmas magical for kids who thought magic had forgotten them. As she talked, Ethan saw echoes of Emily, of Pip, of SciFi, children seeing a need and wanting to fill it, children learning that the best magic was the magic you made for others. I think that's a wonderful idea, he said softly. And I'll help however I can. His daughter hugged him tightly. I'm glad you came home. Dad, I'm glad you're here. Me too, sweetheart, Ethan replied. Me too. That night, after his daughter had gone to bed, Ethan stood by the window watching the snowfall. He thought about the path that had led him here, the mistakes and the redemption, the stockings and the choices, the realization that caring was never wasted, even when it seemed small. He'd been a janitor on a space station, invisible and forgotten, and then he'd listened to some children planning Christmas, and everything had changed. He'd spent everything he had to fill their stockings, and in return he'd gotten a new purpose, new friends, and eventually his daughter back. It was the best trade he'd ever made. His communicator chimed softly, a message from Orion Station. He opened it to find a video from the children. They were gathered in the assembly hall, stockings hung behind them, waving at the camera. Merry Christmas, Mr. Cole, Emily said. Speaking for all of them, we miss you. But we're so glad you're with your daughter. That's where Santa Claus should be on Christmas, with the people who need him most. Pip stepped forward. We are keeping Christmas alive here, he said solemnly, and we are teaching it to new beings. Soon the whole galaxy will know about caring, about magic, about Christmas, all because you filled our stockings. SciFi's added, come back soon, Mr. Cole, we have much to show you. The video ended with all of them shouting together, Merry Christmas. Thank you for everything. Ethan wiped his eyes. He sent a message back, thanking them, telling them he was proud, promising to return soon. Then he looked up at the stockings hanging over his fireplace, two of them, his and his daughter's, waiting for Christmas morning. He thought about filling them, about continuing the tradition, but then he had a better idea. In the morning, he'd suggest they fill stockings together for the children. His daughter had mentioned they'd start small, just a few kids, but it would grow. It always did when people decided to care. That was the real magic of Christmas, Ethan realized. Not flying reindeer or mystical gift givers, just people deciding that someone else's joy mattered, just ordinary beings choosing to be extraordinary for a moment, just caring when you didn't have to, especially when you didn't have to. He was a janitor who'd become Santa Claus, who'd become a father again. He'd traveled across the galaxy and back home. He'd made mistakes and found redemption. He'd learned that the smallest gestures could change everything. And as he stood there in the quiet of Christmas Eve, watching snow fall on a world that was both strange and familiar, Ethan Cole felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. doing exactly what he was meant to do. Caring, listening, creating magic, being human. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. Ethan woke to find his daughter already up, standing by the stockings with a curious expression. "Dad," she said, "our stockings are full." Ethan sat up, confused. What? She held up her stocking, bulging with small gifts. "I didn't fill yours." "You didn't fill mine, so who did?" They opened their stockings together, pulling out small wrapped packages. Inside were thoughtful gifts, a new set of colored pencils for his daughter, who loved to draw, a journal for Ethan, leather-bound and beautiful, chocolate, and small toys and handwritten notes. The notes explained everything. They were from neighbors, from his daughter's teachers, from people in the community who'd heard about the human janitor, who'd brought Christmas to the aliens, who'd spent everything he had to fill stockings for strangers' children, who'd reminded everyone what Christmas really meant. "We wanted to fill your stockings." One note read, "The way you filled theirs, we wanted you to feel the magic." 2. Ethan couldn't speak. He just held the gifts and shook his head in wonder. His daughter was reading her notes with tears streaming down her face. "They did for us what you did for them," she said. "They made Christmas magical. That's the thing about caring." Ethan managed to say, "It spreads. You care for someone, and they care for someone else, and eventually it comes back around. But you can't do it expecting that. You have to care just because it's right." His daughter hugged him. "You're a good dad," she said. "You're a good person." "I'm sorry I ever doubted that." Ethan held her close, thinking about all the choices that had led to this moment. The choice to listen to children planning Christmas, the choice to spend everything he had, the choice to try again with his daughter, the choice to care over and over even when it was hard. That's what being Santa Claus really means, he thought. Not the red suit or the reindeer, just the stubborn, persistent, ridiculous choice to care, to see someone who needs magic and decide to give it to them, to believe that small gestures matter, that kindness spreads, that hope is worth fighting for. He'd learned that on Orion Station. He'd learned it from alien children who'd hung stockings without knowing anyone would fill them. He'd learned it from his own mistakes and the grace of second chances. And now, standing in his childhood home with his daughter in his arms and stockings full of gifts from a community that had learned to care, Ethan Cole understood the final truth of Christmas. It was never about the gifts. It was never about the traditions or the decorations or the perfect celebration. It was about people deciding that other people mattered. It was about choosing to see needs and fill them. It was about making magic real, one small gesture at a time. It was about being human, and that, Ethan realized, was the greatest gift of all. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments. Whether positive or negative, your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug and see you in the next